Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
So are you going to buy that new Flock of Seagulls album that comes out next week?
Say what?
Yeah, brand new Flock of Seagulls. Well, kind of. Welcome to another episode of Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast. My name is Jim Gleason. I'm a record store owner.
Steve Carlson, record collector.
So, Steve, we're going to get into this whole notion of artists re-recording their older material and repackaging it for release to a brand new, hopefully brand new audience of folks, as well as talking about these tribute albums that are put together. But first, before that, let's get into our weekly ritual here. What new and exciting stuff have you brought into the collection this week?
There was a UK band called The Tubs, and they put out their first album called Dead Meat. And it's like kind of 80s jangle rock, if you think of Paisley Underground type feel, with a little bit of a post-punk in there. Really neat stuff. I'm pretty excited about that one. I picked up a Radio Wasteland, Sid Barrett's Opal. It was it's just, different songs from 68 to 70 that he put out. And that was pretty good. I had it years ago, didn't like it. I repurchased it. I found that I really, really enjoyed that one quite a bit.
The Sid Barrett stuff is definitely an acquired taste. I mean, with Floyd, it's one thing, but on his own, it really shone through his let's call it creativity and not mental state.
Yes, we'll say that. We'll call it whimsical.
There we go.
Yes. And then I got in that De La Soul, finally, that 3 Feet High and Rising. It's been hard to get, the colored vinyl, but I tell you, get onto some sites, they bought it up. You could find it. So
did you get the, I think there was a turquoise or a yellow?
I think mine's is pink.
Pinkish, the turquoise, I think is what they were.
Yeah, there's like 5 different
there
colors.
Oh,
my God, everyone has a color. Walmart has a color, Target has a color, Amazon has a color. They all have colors.
Well, here at Radio Wasteland, we were limited to just the black vinyl copy, and that was it. They were tough to get.
Well, that's a color.
Yes.
So what did you pick up this week?
It was kind of a lighter one. I picked up 3, newer releases and one yet to be. I've exercised record store owner privilege on a couple of things recently. But I picked up this, of course, the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon live at Wembley, which I think you still want a copy of that.
Yeah.
I took that and opened up a copy a day early and gave it a listen, and it is everything that I thought it was going to be. It sounds so fantastic. It's unreal. Whoever did the vinyl cut or the mastering on this release, I'd have to look that back up. They did it with vinyl specifically in mind because it's so deep and rich. The bass on Money just is very, very driving. Wow. And there's a lot of cool stuff. And for a live record, they really kind of downplayed the crowd noise until you needed it, which is important in a Floyd album because there's so many quiet parts.
Yes.
So looking forward to hearing what you think when you give this a listen, but it's just a fantastic live version. And it blows away the bootlegs that we have always said were such great recordings.
Yeah.
So
was that a 1 album or 2 albums?
It's a single LP, so it's just The Dark Side of the Moon. They eliminated this concert from Wembley in 74 originally, and on some of the bootlegs, they got into some other stuff.
Yes.
Most notably, one whole side of a bootleg is the song Echoes.
Yeah.
So that is eliminated from this. But the packaging is great, too. The cover, I can see the line art. You're looking at a little bit of history there, but it's got a couple of very cool posters inside of it as well.
All right. Awesome.
Phenomenal. Then I picked up, this officially releases next Friday. It's Tripping Daisy's first album entitled Bill. So Music on Vinyl did the reissue of I'm an Elastic Firecracker, several months back, and now they've gone back in the Tripping Daisy catalog to reissue Bill, which is a great new psych rock album from Tripping Daisy. I call it new psych even though it's 30 years old now, but still very cool stuff. And it's a Music on Vinyl release, and so it sounds fantastic.
Do you like that one better than the other one?
I like Elastic Firecracker better, but it's only because I've been more familiar. I've had an OG of Firecracker for several years now, and Bill has never been on vinyl before, so I've only heard a few digital copy songs. I've never owned the CD. It's some good stuff, and I will, I think, enjoy it as much as Firecracker. I just have to grow on me for a little bit. The only thing I'm a little upset about is the fact that the CD version had a copy of a cover of Green Tambourine by the Lemon Pipers, done by Tripping Daisy, which was just, it's cool, and you can't really find that anywhere. I think I've come across one live video of it on YouTube, but they eliminated that cover from this reissue of Bill. So kind of a bummer, but... And then the third thing I picked up and we kept was this various country music artists covering Rolling Stones. It's called Stoned Cold Country, a 60th anniversary tribute to the Rolling Stones. So it's a lot of contemporary artists, Ashley McBryde, Kip Moore. And I'm not a big country music fan, but this is actually a really cool cover album.
Well, and you played me a sample of that, and it's more rock than country, quite honestly. I mean, they really come out and play.
So it's very cool, and we'll get into that subject of tribute albums to artists here in a little bit. But today's episode, we wanted to focus on this notion of artists re-recording their own music first.
Yeah.
And you kind of brought this up as a subject when you gave a preview listen to that new U2 that came out last week, which is a reimagining of U2 hits, but done acoustically.
Yes. Yeah, I was surprised when they did that. And I thought, okay, so what's it going to be like? Because I like U2. I really like their stuff from the 80s, the 90s, the beginning of the aughts. The last few albums, quite frankly, I have not been enamored with. I had them, but I played them once and put them away. So when this came out, I thought, okay, what's it going to be like? And I watched some videos and people were loving it. This is great. I love this. I love what they've done with it. You big U2 fans. So I'd say, okay, I'm going to stream a little bit of this. And I had just the most wonderful nap. I mean, I woke up, I was refreshed, it was still playing, and for me, it didn't hit. For others, they just thought it was wonderful, and I think that's how a reimagined thing goes, How, do we want an artist to stray away and come up with something new? And sometimes it does work really good. For me, this one didn't.
Well, especially when they revisit their hits, which... the early U2 stuff as well. I mean, I would put that into college radio. I like that. Yes. I like that genre title better than a lot of these other ones that have come up since the 80s. But college radio music at that time had its own very specific sound, had its very own specific feeling. It was something that was new, and it wasn't the harder rock and roll. And U2 kind of bridged that gap with their early stuff that wasn't punk, but it wasn't rock. It was college radio music. So to hear these turned into acoustic, and The Edge, I guess, curated this entire collection. And over the past 2 years, they re-recorded a lot of these earlier hits acoustically. But maybe as we get older, maybe we just want something a little more mellow.
If I get much older, I'm in the grave, so I'm not sure.
And this kind of reminded me of another one. This one came out actually in 2005. This was another Music on Vinyl reissue several years later. But Alanis Morissette and her just breakthrough album, Jagged Little Pill, was redone in 2005 as an acoustic album. And if you're familiar with the original version of her album, it's just got so much angst and so much energy and so much just vitality to it. To have it tuned down to an acoustic recording when you hear You Oughta Know, acoustically, it just doesn't have the same effect for me.
Well, that was the importance of that Morissette album. It was about the angst because that thing was pure energy. And you would put that on and you could feel what she was doing. And those songs were about that. And to quiet it down, yeah, I had no interest.
It didn't work for me, but it's kind of a cool thing. We've got one in our collection because we like the first album, the original album, so much, but maybe there's some nights you just want to relax a little bit. You don't need that anger.
I don't need the anger. No.
At 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night.
It depends on your day at work.
That's true.
Now, I think 2 years ago, Moby went and he took his hits and he reimagined them. But he became a artist on Deutsche Grammophon. So he put orchestration into this, brought some other people into it. And it is the most incredibly beautiful album. I think it was like my second or third favorite album from 2021. What he did with that reimagination of these, it just taking this dance stuff, but given that classical tinge, but yet it still had the feel of his hits. And blew me away.
I guess that is the term. I mean, if we use the term reimagined, if you're just re-recording something, then it is it falls flat. But a complete reimagination, like you said with Moby, and maybe in some cases, like Morissette did or like U2 just did, it's different enough from the original stuff as to be a standalone product.
That's obviously what they're trying to do, and for their fans to really say, okay, this is a lot of fun, and I want to listen to this. And like the Morissette, you say, hey, it's a nice one to relax to, and that's what people are going to find out about that U2. If you want to sit and you want to relax and enjoy the hits that way, you're going to do it. But, I like the power of some of those songs. Now, you have one. Okay, one was quiet. Somehow they made it quieter. But you have, the song, Sunday, Bloody Sunday. And it was, there's some power to this. And now it's just this acoustic sound. And that one, it just didn't work as well for me.
This whole idea, though, of artists just re-recording, and we'll get into some of the reasons. I did some research on the reasoning that artists do this, and it obviously comes down to money a lot of times. But some of these just fall so terribly, terribly flat that, reviews on them are just horrible as well. I brought one out here from our racks. This Badfinger album, it's called, what is it? No Matter
What, Revisiting the Hits.
Revisiting the Hits. Now, this album came out a couple of years ago, 21.
Yep, 21.
A couple of years ago. I sold it. That was returned because the person that bought it thought that it was going to be a Badfinger album, Greatest Hits. And I kind of dropped the ball on that. And I remember that coming out, remember knowing that it was a revisitation.
Yes.
But they revisited that one, or they reimagined that one so hard that it actually stunk up the joint. Now, the only original member left in Badfinger on this record from 21 is
Joey Molland.
And he was the lead singer, if I recall, from Badfinger, maybe guitar in there as well. But this one brought in guest artists to kind of fill it, but under the guise of being a Badfinger album.
Uh-huh.
So there's Ian Anderson.
Oh,
on
yeah.
flute.
You have, what do we got here? We have Terry Reid is on here. Rick Springfield. Oh, boy. Matthew Sweet, which I really like his stuff. Albert Lee, Todd Rundgren, and a host of others.
And the thing is, though, that could be a tribute album by the sounds of it, except for Molland being on there. And technically speaking, it's a Badfinger album. It's listed on Discogs as a Badfinger album. So the person that returned it's like, it doesn't sound anything like the Badfinger I remember hearing these songs. Yeah. Very classic ones. So it was reimagined so far out of the realm that it was no longer something that they recognized.
Another group I just thinking as you were doing that, Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson has reimagined, sometimes under his name, sometimes under Jethro Tull's name. But I believe even the guitarist Martin Barr now is touring under a Jethro Tull name. It's, confusion.
We get into this whole licensing issue. There was one other one that came out in 20, by the way. It was Eddie Money, released a year after he died, but recorded obviously beforehand. It was called Take Me Home Tonight, the best of Eddie Money. So you think that this is an Eddie Money album. You go into the Discogs, they've got reviews at the bottom edge of a lot of the Discogs pages. One of them says, "My dog just loves this. She loves playing catch with this record. It makes a great Frisbee." The worst new record I've ever purchased. Will never play it again, and that makes me mad. And the idea being that in very, very small print, and I do remember this because we had a few, on the back of the album jacket, very small print, it said these are re-recorded versions of Eddie Money's hits. George Thorogood did this last year as well. And a lot of times these artists are re-recording these because of licensing issues with their original record labels. So I'd read somewhere that, you think about Taylor Swift, and we'll talk about her in a moment. Yeah. But this actually goes back to the Everly Brothers. They started off with, was one of their first labels, and then they signed with Warner. And after they made it bigger on Warner Brothers, they decided, well, let's repackage some of our early stuff from this smaller label and put it on this bigger label and just include these on newer albums. So this goes back decades where artists were doing this with their own work.
Well, you think the blues, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, if they would get onto a different label, Lightning Hopkins is a big one. And so they would take something that they had done, and we're just redoing this now. So we're taking these hits, we're going to change it up and make it something totally supposedly different. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just don't.
Now this goes, I think the bigger example of this right now is Taylor Swift. And what she has started doing with her Taylor's version of her first, I think it's 6 albums that she had recorded with Big Machine Records. Now, she was 15 years old when she signed with Big Machine Records. And as part of that label deal, they retained the rights to the master tapes of all the albums that she had recorded with them. So I guess in my reading throughout her tenure with this label, she had really worked to release all of these new albums that made her a superstar, but also was working to get control of her master tapes back, which she never did accomplish. When her contract was up with this label, she had decided maybe I'm going to sign with another one, kind of like what the Everly Brothers did, and ended up with UMG. But they offered her, Big Machine had offered her a re-up on her contract, and they said that they would give her back her master tapes, but only one at a time. And so she would retain control of a master tape only when she would release a new album for this label. So it was almost like they're holding her hostage. And I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to defend Taylor Swift on this. But it doesn't seem to be about money solely in her case. It was about control of her product. Now, there's a big difference between retaining the songwriting rights. She is the author. She is credited with that. And owning the master tapes. And that's what this came down to, is the fact that she wanted to be able to utilize some of these older recordings and things. I think there was a Netflix documentary. There was a Grammy. They wanted to use some of old music of hers in a Grammy collage of music. And the record label was giving her a little bit of a problem with that.
Sure. And I know you had mentioned to me earlier that she wasn't even allowed to try to bid on these.
No, when she decided to re-sign, or not re-sign, but when sign with the new label at UMG, the old label sold these to a music manager by the name of Scooter Braun. He's a big-time music manager. He managed Kanye West and even Justin Bieber. And he appears to be like the nemesis of Taylor Swift. And she has accused Braun of bullying her throughout the year. So when the label sold basically the label sold to Braun, and her master tapes were part of that deal, she wasn't given the opportunity to bid on it. And this was a very, very public blow up a few years back.
So, kids, very important tip here. Someone by the name of Scooter, just say no. That can't be good. I mean, name someone by the name of Scooter, even in a movie that's really good. No, that's like an evil name. Don't trust Scooter.
Other than the Muppets, maybe.
Oh, I guess they did have that Scooter. Come to think of it, I didn't like him though. But
so this battle with Swift and her old label got so contentious that obviously this was in the news a lot. But she finally just said, "You know what? Go ahead. You guys can have that. I am going to re-record my first 6 albums and release new ones with my new label." And then just call them Taylor's version. I'm not a big Taylor Swift fan, so I can't say that I'm very well versed on how different the new versions are, but I don't believe they're that different. There may be a little tweak there. Her voice may have matured a little bit over these earlier albums, more professional mixing on some of them, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
But she carries with her so much weight with the Swifties that she can just say, I'm re-recording these. Don't listen to those old ones, just listen to mine, and then they won't make any more money off of them.
Yeah, she does. She has, talk about a gal with power, and such a rabid fan base. Good for her.
So even though this idea of artists re-recording their stuff has been going on for decades and decades, I think she is probably the more public face of this, with the exception of, what's his name, Ozzy Osbourne and Sharon. Have you ever heard about this one? This goes back to, actually to the 80s when Ozzy left Sabbath and recorded his first 2 solo albums, Diary of a Madman and Blizzard of Oz, 1980 for Blizzard and 81 for Diary. But right after those albums were released, Sharon, according to what I've read,
of course,
stepped in and fired the drummer and the bass player. Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake were fired. And I do remember this because then Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo were credited on that first solo album as being parts of Ozzy's band when they actually weren't the ones that recorded that. Okay. So they get the credit on here. In 1986, Daisley and Kerslake sued the Osbournes for that admission, and won, eventually getting some unpaid royalties for that and some crediting on the album covers. But then let's fast forward this to 2002. There was a reissue of both of those albums. And this is kind of an argument. I don't get into this whole drama between Ozzy and Sharon and all this. I don't pay attention to that. But on these 2002 reissues of those two albums, somebody, and Ozzy says it was Sharon says it was Ozzy, went back in, removed the bass and the drum tracks, and then recorded them with Ozzy's newest band members.
Oh, man.
You want to talk about the ultimate D move on that part, but...
Well, Sharon Osbourne was someone that if you crossed her, she would never forget. An elephant that will never forget. But who knows which one it was. But
well,
wow.
she gave an interview at the time saying because of Daisley and Kerslake's abusive and unjust behavior, i.e. them suing the Osbournes for royalties,
Yep.
Ozzy wanted me to remove them from these recordings. We turned a negative into a positive by adding a fresh sound to the original albums.
Okay. And screwing them over.
So
Wow.
there's been other examples of this, and I found an article talking about the reasons that musicians re-record their music. Taylor Swift, obviously, the feud with her label, but this also happened with Def Leppard. And with Taylor, I said, okay, it's not about the money, but I think if you follow the trail, it does ultimately become about the money. But Def Leppard re-recorded a bunch of their earlier stuff as well. And Joe Elliott gave an interview in 2012 saying, it's about principle. But then he added, I'd be lying if I didn't say it was about money because the problem is, well, they want to pay us what we think is a ridiculously low rate. And it's a well-known fact that artists throughout the years have always been shafted by record companies. So in re-recording these, they regain more control over the financial side of things.
Okay. Now, when I think of bands doing kind of a re-recording or a reimagining, think of the 90s with MTV Unplugged. Now, there was a great case where some incredible albums came out when they went acoustic and reimagined these songs. Nirvana.
Yep.
Pearl. So many of them. That was a huge thing. And Rod Stewart comes in and redoes it. And, it took off for those artists, but they reimagined them and it sounded wonderful.
So what we're saying is that if they have a purpose and if they create enough of a derivative work that it becomes its own entity, I think it's okay.
I would agree. It's when you're sometimes people say I'm out of ideas. I need to put out an album. I got to put something out. I have no ideas. I'm just going to reimagine. And I look at, at times with Van Morrison, you get some of these albums. He's just redoing some of them hits. We're going to revisit them. Bob Dylan will do that. I'm going to change it up. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But it almost feels I'm running out of ideas. While the whole MTV thing was, we're just going to redo this whole thing. It's not that we're out of ideas, but let's try it this way.
I think some of the artists you mentioned, too, they've got a little bit more depth in their catalog to go to when they're saying that we're going to reimagine these. So they can go back to larger bodies of work and experiment with them. Whereas, well, let's pick on Flock of Seagulls again, because this is what started this.
Or Aha.
A week ago. But yeah, the Flock of Seagulls, again, one or two hits. I Ran So Far Away, their big one. This is coming out from Cleopatra on the 31st of March. And my description in our distributor says, and they're very, very, I think, more transparent about this than they were with the Eddie Money one. A new vinyl collection of recut classics from the 80s, new wave icons, A Flock of Seagulls. Includes the band's signature hit, I Ran So Far Away, and then goes on and on with other ones. But they're very clearly stating that these are remixed and reimagined versions of this. So I think with a band like A Flock of Seagulls, again, I don't think they have the depth of catalog that others would to dive into to warrant a reimagination.
They don't. Here's a case where they're back on the circuit right now. They're touring around because, there's a big thing for 80s synth bands out there. They're popular. And so they don't know what to do. They ran out of, their creative juices died like decades ago. So, people love our hits. Let's just do it again.
I don't mean to be mean to them, but that's a little sad.
Yeah. I agree. But I think it'll happen more and more because of so many people wanting to relive some of that.
It's the
Thinking
nostalgia.
back. Yeah. Definitely the nostalgia, but these 1 or 2 hit wonders. And maybe in Britain, obviously, they're probably more on the charts. They had more. When we look in the U.S., it's just 2 hits basically here. But when you haven't done anything for years, and then we do something like that, we just don't know what to do.
Where do you stand on, and we're coming up on time here, but I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about these tribute albums. So we mentioned the Rolling Stones' 60th anniversary, but reimagined or recovered by country artists.
Yeah.
These are kind of cool, and you're seeing a lot of these things out there by various artists covering the music of a particular artist gathered together on a compilation.
One of the best ones I remember was a Grateful Dead dedicated. And that came out in 1991. And they had all these different people come in and do Grateful Dead songs. And I'd never listened to the Grateful Dead. And I listened to that and go, wow, this is really, really good. A lot of times it can kind of fall flat because we're coming in, we're changing it up, doing our own thing, and they stray so far away from the song, you don't know where the heck they're going. And so, I think you need to try to keep, the core of that song there so you still have the feel for this music because you're buying it because you love that song or that thing, and you don't want them to come up with some crazy rendition that you just don't get.
But still not stray too far or keep it close enough to be recognizable as that music.
Yes, it needs to be. It has to be recognizable personally. Otherwise, it's not their thing.
It's a delicate balance.
Mm-hmm.
So what other ones out there? There are, we have covered here on our YouTube channel and talked with the folks at Rushfest Scotland, a tribute album that they do for Neil Peart. They've got a third one coming up here pretty soon on vinyl. It's already been released digitally. But these are done by tribute bands gathered together, in this case, for a cause. I think that's a little bit different than a label putting together a tribute to the Rolling Stones or a tribute. There's every week on my upcoming releases, I see another one. There's one coming next week to Queen, various artists paying tribute to Queen. Yeah. And it's not like they're brought together for the purpose of this. These are recordings that have been made over the course of the history of an artist saying, oh, we recorded this Queen song in 1998, let's put it on this album.
More of a cash grab.
You said it there. I think that's the case.
Yeah.
So I think exercise caution and listen to some previews like you did with the Stones.
Yeah, with that U2. Yes, you do. You need to really make sure it's something you want so you won't be disappointed. And I've seen some videos. People loved that new U2, thought it was great, and I saw some that did not because it just got too quiet.
And it all comes back down to personal taste. I like cover tunes, and sometimes I don't.
Yeah, I agree. Same
I like
here.
reimagination. Sometimes I don't.
Yes.
I think it depends on the artist and the way that they do it, which is everything that we've been talking about.
Yep, absolutely.
In closing, I guess I'd want to say that if artists are going to do this, what I appreciate is transparency, that this is a reimagination of. Make it visible,
Agreed.
Make it more than just a tiny bit on the back of there, or do it as differently as U2 has done to say that we are really going to go back in our catalog deep and come up with something new with it.
And not something like this Badfinger.
No, that technically fools people.
Yes,
So.
that was a Badfinger they used on that.
Okay, Steve, so that will do it and wrap up this week's episode of Two Guys Talking About Records. Where can folks see you?
They can see me on my YouTube channel, Steve Carlson, Vinyl Community.
And you can check us out at RadioWastelandRecords.com and search for Radio Wasteland Records on YouTube as well. Thanks again, Steve. We'll talk to you next week.
You bet, Jim. Look forward to it.
About records.